Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Welcome back, everyone. When a loved one is diagnosed with something very serious, and now you've taken on the role of caregiver, there's so much responsibility that goes along with that. Not only are you taking care of them, you're taking care of yourself, you're taking care of your family. Oh, you may be working as well. So many different things come into play with that. How do you navigate that? There's coaches for everything out there. There's also a coach to help you with caregiving. I never even knew. How refreshing, how important that is. And I found her. She's here. We're going to talk about all of that today. She's Marika Humphreys, and she joins us on the program. Welcome. How are you doing?
I am doing great. Steve, how are you doing?
Terrific. Terrific. And this came to light for me last year. Somebody I know is caring for his wife. And he actually said, like, there's so many things that people don't realize when it comes to caregiving, where you're giving of yourself, and understandably so. It's somebody that you love that now is dealing with a medical issue. But you have that doesn't mean that all the other stuff goes away. It just means you got one more thing on your plate. I want to go, if we can, right into your journey, which got you here, because I feel learning your story would be very impactful. Can we do that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure. Tell us.
Okay, so I was my husband and I were going about our lives. We had a little bit, somewhat of a non-traditional, I guess, relationship you could say, in that I was the primary working person, and my husband was the stay-at-home parent. Our child was 5 at the time, and I remember I had gone on a business trip through my job to the East Coast. We were living in Northern California. I came home, he picked me up from the airport, and I remember as we're driving home, he looks at me and says, "Marika, there's something I need to tell you." And of course, the first thing I thought was, "You're having an affair." I don't know why. I mean, we had like no, we weren't having any challenges in our relationship, but I guess that's just, the first thing your mind goes to. And what he told me was that they had found a cancerous tumor in his arm. And that is something I was not at all prepared for. He had been having some shoulder issues and he'd been going to physical therapy. Well, it turns out that was in fact cancer, and they discovered it through an MRI. And this had happened while I was on the trip, and he waited till I got home, which was very kind of him. So that news, I just remember sitting in the car and trying to process it. I mean, we had nobody in our family who'd experienced cancer. It just really flipped our lives upside down. And I was not quite 40 at the time. He was a little bit older. He was in his mid-50s. And again, like I said, had a 5-year-old. So we were in the middle of life and just working and raising a family and doing, the regular things. So that was the start of our journey. And it wasn't really until a couple years in. So we got through that first year. He ended up having a surgery. He had several rounds of intense chemotherapy, which just were awful for him. And we got through that first year, and basically we thought he was fine, and he was for a couple years. And then fast forward about 2 years, 3 years down the line, and he was having some strange symptoms and kind of losing his sense of direction. And then it turns out that he had a tumor in his brain. So that created another actually emergency, medevac to a hospital to have emergency surgery. And then while we were in the hospital, we found out that the cancer from his arm had spread to his chest. So the brain tumor was actually a different type of cancer. And all to say that, I mean, I'm telling this story in retrospect, obviously, but it was just a crazy journey. And whether it's cancer or something, kind of going from your regular life in a marriage and raising children to this up and down journey where one partner becomes, a patient and is dealing with major, disease. And so in that process, when his cancer came back and the brain surgery was successful and they removed the tumor, but I kind of think of that now as the second half of our journey, because it was during that time that we really started looking around for different types of solutions to what we knew was this struggle of facing cancer. And yes, there's all the medical things. So we started looking a little bit broader there, but also we started looking into how to support ourselves mentally and emotionally. And it was my husband who found this coaching podcast. It's called the Life Coach School Podcast. It's still a fantastic podcast, and was introduced to coaching through that podcast. And literally just listening to the podcast, we both started learning just tools to put ourselves back in control when it felt like we were in this situation that was so much out of our control. And obviously from different perspectives. I mean, he was facing cancer and then a reoccurrence of cancer and the recovery and, all of the impacts of that. I was facing it from the perspective of his spouse and the caregiver, or a lot of times there's a term called care partner, which is probably more accurate for a lot of people, where you help make those care decisions. So that was really an introduction to coaching, and both so life-changing for both of us, so helpful and so just useful, that learning tools to cope with the mental and the emotional part. And so that part led us to joining a coaching program together as a couple. And then we actually wanted to we wanted to become coaches together and focus on helping other couples in this circumstance. And he ended up passing away from cancer. So I essentially carried on after he passed away about a year later. And I left my job, which was doing something entirely different, and became a full-time coach focused on caregivers, people who were specifically caregiving for a partner, but caregiving in general is now really what I, help people with.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. Oh my gosh. I have chills. Like, just, getting the first diagnosis, barreling through that, living life at the same time with a small child, and then having to circle back to it again, and then losing your spouse. Wow. Nobody knows it better than you do when it comes to coaching as a caregiver, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah. And, being a coach now, I mean, daily I hear people's stories my stories was with cancer, but I have a client now who's caregiving for her husband who was super fit and active and then had a stroke, and now he's basically disabled and partially cognitively impaired. So that is an experience that I can't exactly relate to, but it creates the same type of just flipping your life upside down. And she faces, some just challenges of now that she's now a caregiver to her partner. And yeah, it's something we never expect. And it's certainly, I think, in midlife, what I tend to think about it. But even no matter when it happens, we never expect that,
No. And it's tough enough when somebody has the flu and you're helping them along. Now you
Yeah.
have something times 1,000 plus. How do you, or how did you increase your mental and emotional capacity? Because, we've got this much we deal with, and that's a lot in life in general. Now you got to expand it, because you've got more, you're taking on more. There's always something else going on. How do you get to the point where you can handle all of the pressure that's going on?
Yeah, I think my own story is very similar to what happens for a lot of people. And I think when people come to me, when they find me and say I need help, it's because they have reached a point of burnout. And that's very much where I was as well. I had reached a point where I felt like I was still working full time, and his health battle was just ongoing. There were ups and downs.
Mm.
Sometimes it was fine, sometimes it was crazy stressful and full of uncertainty and fear. And I remember just feeling very worn out from all of it. And also at the same time, feeling very guilty for feeling that way because I wasn't sick like he was. I was just struggling to kind of live my normal life and cope with everything that he was going through and what it meant for our family and the changes in our relationship. And so that was a big a realization for me. And I think we had started the coaching program at this point. So a
Mm.
big realization for me was just learning that my perspective and my struggle was also important and equally important to his struggle, even though they were completely different. Like he was facing cancer and, literally battling this disease. I was struggling with burnout and emotional overwhelm and kind of trying to do too many things and feeling like I needed to hold it all together. And that is a very different challenge, but it was my challenge and important because if I didn't deal with it, I wasn't going to be able to show up, as the parent I wanted to be, as the employee that I wanted to be, as the spouse that I wanted to be, because I was so miserable and, worn out. So that was the start of kind of just a shift in thinking that allowed me to give myself permission to like start focusing on how do I help myself. And then to kind of circle back to your question, how do you expand your mental and emotional capacity? I mean, I really believe it's just learning some skills that most of us aren't really taught. And they're useful in all aspects of life. But I think for me, caregiving just applied more pressure to, already stressful life. And so I really needed to find tools to do that. And one of the first tools that I learned and that I teach people now is just starting to notice what is going on inside your head. And, some people, we have a lot of negative chatter, or we kind of have these horrible thoughts on repeat, like, what if they don't make it? Or what if I'm a single parent? Or, what if we just get more bad news? I mean, we all have sort of an internal dialogue. And the first step to just learning how to sort of take charge of that crazy mental dialogue is to pay attention to it. And like I teach people to write things down,
I
kind
was
of,
just going to say that.
yes.
Like that is my one, and I'm guilty of not doing it enough. But when you write it down, it becomes real because we call it the monkey chatter in your mind. You think of this, then you think of that, then you think of this, and then a lot of people have anxiety. So now add that into it, and now your car screeching all over the road of to the left, to the right, you feel like you're gonna crash. No, I'm over here. Now I'm over here. When you write it down, and it's scientifically proven, I know
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
the connection from here to the hand and writing it, don't type it, write it, is powerful
Yeah.
and helps you sort things out. Now it's in front of you, whether you want to look at it or not. It validates your thoughts, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that is, I just find that sometimes you can discover things that you didn't realize you were thinking that come out in that process. And then it gives you a chance to just take a look and see what's going on inside your head. I use an analogy a lot of times of the messy closet. I call it like, because everybody's got like either it's a drawer or a closet, or for some people it's the whole garage or a
Mm-hmm.
shed, or depending on how much space you have. Um, you know, we have this space where we just shove stuff and we know it's there, and yet we don't want to look in there because it's just a mess. But it bothers us too because we don't really know what's inside, and you just can pack more things in there. And sometimes our brain gets like that. It becomes the messy closet. And the first thing you need to do is just take everything out and just take a look at what's there. And then you can start making decisions about
Mm.
it. But that process of writing down is essentially cleaning out the closet, of your brain. And the more frequently you do that, like, especially if you do it daily, you keep a cleaner closet essentially. So, and you just have awareness of like what's in there, and then you can again separate yourself. And sometimes, a lot of times, it's just seeing what keeps coming up. Are there fears that I'm kind of pushing to the background, or worries or anxieties that maybe are irrational, but we think of them in the back of our mind. And so once you bring them out into the forefront, it gives you a chance to just take a look and maybe question them, maybe think on them, maybe think about solutions instead of just dwelling on, the anxiety. So yeah, it's a super helpful. I think it's just an easy thing to do, and it's super helpful.
It's a great analogy. The drawer, call it the file cabinet. You throw it in your file cabinet of emotion, and it's all in there. Well, like your closet, like a cabinet, you can't clean it out unless you know what's in there. I've got a file cabinet right here. There's so much stuff in there. Like I keep wires. I'm geeky. I got an idea what's in there, but I'm not really 100% sure. And sometimes when I have a moment, I'm like, oh, well, I didn't even know I had this. Well, I have this. So until you take the inventory of your mind, you can't really get an idea of what's going on because your mind is always wavering back and forth. And I want to add one more layer of challenge to a lot of this is caring for somebody that has challenges in itself, then dealing with insurance companies. Oh my gosh, that's got to add so much on top of things, right?
Oh yeah, it does. I feel like it depends on, where you live in the world. In the United States, that's something that we have to deal with, and that's just part of navigating any medical system. And the challenge is it's different for everybody because every insurance company is different, and all of that. I think what is super helpful is how you think about it and less like specific tips, because again, it can be very different. So sometimes we tend to focus on like all the things that we don't know, like I don't know who to call, or I don't know who to talk to, or how to get the service that my loved one needs. That was something actually I faced when
Mm.
we found out my husband had the brain tumor. We were dealing with the primary care doctor, and she was very unhelpful. And I had thoughts about her for many years afterwards that I had to work through. But she really basically said, you need to go see a neurosurgeon. Well, then I discovered that neurosurgeons are not super common. And we were in Northern California. So granted, small town Northern California obviously depends on where you live. But um, the only way you could get an appointment, it was like 2 weeks out. And he needed to see someone like now. And basically, I learned through, I think she eventually said, well, the only way to get seen is to go to the emergency room. And in my mind, that was like, but that is not what the emergency room is for. However, I learned essentially it was kind of a way to bypass our medical system. I don't know, I'm not advocating that at all. I don't know. I think, again, it depends on the situation, but it did get my husband basically treated fairly immediately. But my point here is not that is the approach you should take, but I think learning to think of, okay, what can I do, or what's the solution? Learning to focus on finding solutions when you don't have the knowledge, because nobody understands navigating this unless you've been through it. And then you learn through the process. But part of that experience, at first, I was so angry and frustrated with her lack of help that I wasn't able to be effective problem solver. And as a caregiver, one of the skills you need is to be a problem solver.
Mm.
And we do our best thinking and problem solving when we're able to be calm and clear-headed and focused. And when we're stressed and anxious, that is not when we're the best problem solvers. So that's where I'm kind of going full circle around to getting at, is how do you get back to a place of kind of calm and focus and, best problem solving mode is by, some of the things we just talked about, like writing down what are all my questions, what are all my worries, and then just kind of working through that so you can calm down and get to a point where, okay, how do I solve the problem? What's the result that I'm trying to get? I need this appointment for my loved one. How do I get there? And so being able to manage your mind and emotions helps you be a better problem solver. And that's how you handle all the unknowns that come with caregiving, like navigating our, insurance process, navigating our medical system, our specialists, different drugs and drug interactions. I mean, it's endlessly complicated, and you have no training for it. I even have a client right now who's a physician, and so she actually does have training for it, which is helpful for her, but she still it's her husband that has cancer. And so she's still also a spouse, right? And so she's also going through all the emotions of this, that the fact that her husband has cancer, but that's just something kind of a balance. Like she's on the one hand has all the medical knowledge, but she still experiences the emotions and has to work through those. So, yeah, being able to have tools for that and kind of a way to get yourself back to a calmer state so you can face whatever challenges you need to. It's just helpful.
That speaks volumes when you say a physician needs a coach for caregiving. That just goes to show the importance of it and the pressure that's on everybody, whether you're a physician or not. And did you come up with some moments, Marika, where you felt stuck? I'm stuck. I don't know what to do.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that happened probably, I don't know, lots of times. I think this is when I think about, this is why I use the word tools, because being a caregiver isn't about finding this state of calm or this state of resilience where we're just positive and we're strong and we're able to kind of march forward and handle things. It's more handling the ups and downs, and it's a constant task. And I think the more resilient person is able to just do that in a more kind of quicker process. So when you notice yourself being stuck, and I'm trying to think of, like, I mean, what that example that I gave when when I was trying to get my husband an appointment with the neurosurgeon, that I remember so strongly how scared and frustrated I felt, and also angry with the
Sure.
primary care doctor because she was so unhelpful.
Well,
I
that's
felt she was so unhelpful.
that
But
adds to it though. Like here you are in, greatest country in the world, and your loved one has a disease and you pay for insurance, like all of this,
yeah.
it's got to weigh on anybody so heavily in terms of frustration. Why am I dealing with this? This shouldn't be that hard. Why can't I just make an appointment? This is very important. Doctor recommends it, but I can't make an appointment. I got to wait at least 2 weeks. It can get, I can see, very frustrating.
Yeah, and some of that is, you know, some of that is our expectations of doctors and
Yes.
our expectations of the system.
Yes.
And I mean, I've had clients in Canada, which has a national healthcare system. They have their own frustrations, so they don't have to
I hear
deal
the
with
same. Yeah.
insurance. Yes.
Yep.
So I think, we can't change those things, at least in the immediate. Maybe they can be changed, and like the big scope of things, but I probably will not be the one to do that. But I hope people are working on making those things better. But so what can we do, kind of given the challenges that we face in whatever medical system or insurance system we have? And that, I think, is some of it is just recognizing every system has its limitations and frustrations, and things are harder than they feel like they should be.
Right.
But catching ourselves thinking that way, like my thinking with my husband and trying to get that appointment with the neurosurgeon, I felt like a victim. Like I felt powerless and frustrated. And that was such a terrible place to be, because you just feel like you have no power in the world. Like I can't do anything. And that is something that you can learn to get yourself out of, because when we feel like a victim, it's just simply how we're thinking, which is crazy. But it is something we can actually take charge of and shift our thinking to, okay, I'm focusing on all the things I don't have control over, like what the primary care doctor tells me. I don't have control over that. I don't actually know what her, like, when I thought about it later, I did a lot of work on that particular experience and reflected and actually learned to have some compassion for her, which, believe me, was hard in the moment. I didn't get there for a couple years. But what I could focus on was basically what actions I can take and what questions I can ask and how many phone calls I can make, and, just kind of learning to flip that dynamic to where our focus is how we'll either feel powerful or at least capable maybe, or powerless. And when we're focused on all of those things that we can't control, we end up feeling like a victim, which is just an unfun place to be.
It's all about the mindset. And I think this applies to pretty much anything. And if you look at yourself as a victim and powerless, you're going to be powerless and a victim. We're out of time. Wonderful talking with you. You're like the breath of fresh air for so many people that may have almost given up. I don't know what to do. I'm getting by every day, but there's still lots of challenges. How do we connect with you? How do we find you?
The best place to connect with me is on my website, and that is coachmarika.com. So Coach Marika, spelled Marika.com. And I do have a podcast, actually, that I just started. So if you're a podcast listener, like I am a huge podcast listener, part of why I enjoy doing these interviews is, so I just started a podcast, and it's called In This Together, Building Resilience When Caregiving for Your Partner. So you can also find that on my website, though. So my website's the best place to go.
Yeah, your website offers a lot of comfort in itself. I'll take the next step and reach out to you. It's like having a friend who understands to move you along the way. Thank you so much for being here today and for what you do. And I am looking forward next time we get together.
All right. Me too. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll be right back.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house. And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned.
This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.